The split doesn't happen when people turn 65. It happens much earlier and much more quietly. Somewhere after 45, two people can be earning almost the same income, living in the same city, even driving down the same street to the same grocery store, and still be moving toward completely different futures. One is building wealth. The other is getting older with expensive habits, shrinking flexibility, and just enough income to hide the problem. From the outside, they may look identical. Inside the math, they are worlds apart. That's the uncomfortable part. After 45, wealth is rarely about dramatic success. It's about whether your financial life produces surplus or consumes it. Whether your systems compound for you or against you. Whether the next 20 years will feel like a widening runway or a narrowing hallway. Because after 45, time changes character. At 25, time is forgiving. You can waste money, recover from dumb decisions, switch careers, start over, lose 5 years, and still tell yourself the story of eventual success. There's enough runway to treat your financial life like an unfinished sketch. At 45, the sketch starts becoming concrete. Not because your life is over. It's not. But because the math becomes less interested in your intentions and more interested in your patterns. A bad decade at 25 is expensive. A bad decade at 45 can become permanent. That's why some people build serious wealth in the second half of life while others slowly fall behind, even if they don't look broke. And the difference is usually not intelligence, not effort, not even income alone. It's arithmetic with emotional consequences. Take two people, both 45 years old. One has figured out how to create a reliable monthly gap between what comes in and what goes out. Not a fantasy gap. A real one. Maybe $1,500 a month. That person doesn't need to be rich. They just need enough discipline, enough structure, and enough clarity to consistently direct that money into assets instead of leakage. Now assume that $1,500 a month gets invested for 20 years at a reasonable long-term return. Nothing magical. Just steady compounding. By 65, that can become roughly $850,000 to $900,000. Not because they had a breakthrough year. Because they had a repeatable system. Now take someone else the same age making the same salary, but with a different monthly reality. Maybe a car payment they normalized. Maybe helping adult children while still carrying their own debt. Maybe upgrading their lifestyle every time income rose. Maybe years of saying, I'll get serious once things settle down. Their monthly gap isn't positive $1,500. It's negative $300. Or flat. Or positive for 3 months, then erased by random spending, travel, home repairs, impulse upgrades, and subscriptions that seemed harmless one at a time. Over 20 years, the difference between those two lives is not $1,500 a month. It's closer to $1 million of distance. That's what people miss. They think wealth is built in giant leaps, so they don't respect the violence of small recurring numbers. A $700 car payment doesn't feel like a retirement decision. A habitual $300 weekend escape doesn't feel like a retirement decision. Covering a grown child's phone bill, insurance, rent shortfall, and emergencies doesn't feel like a retirement decision. But after 45, many things that don't feel like retirement decisions are exactly that. Because you're no longer just spending money. You're spending capital formation time. And capital formation time in your late 40s and 50s is insanely valuable. People say, it's only 10 years, as if 10 years is short. 10 years of compounding is not short. 10 years of debt is not short. 10 years of carrying a lifestyle you can no longer easily out-earn is not short. 10 years is enough time to transform your future or quietly trap it. That's why the real dividing line after 45 is not usually salary. It's financial architecture. How much of your life requires maintenance? How expensive is your identity? How many of your monthly expenses are actually obligations you chose years ago and now have to keep feeding? A lot of people hit midlife with a good income and a fragile machine. Their whole life works, but only at a certain burn rate. The mortgage, the car, the insurance, the dining habits, the vacations, the school support, the image maintenance, the gifts, the we deserve it spending, the little upgrades that keep life feeling successful. And because the income is decent, nobody panics. That's the trap. High earners can delay reality longer than low earners. That doesn't mean they've escaped it. In some cases, they've made it worse. Because the person earning $80,000 and living on $55,000 may be building more real wealth than the person earning $180,000 and requiring $170,000 a year to feel normal. One has margin. The other has costume jewelry made of cash flow. After 45, margin is everything. Margin is what lets you invest when the market is ugly. Margin is what lets you say no to a toxic job. Margin is what lets you survive layoffs without becoming desperate. Margin is what lets you help family without destroying yourself. Margin is what turns money from an anxiety management tool into a freedom tool. And margin is built less through brilliance than subtraction. That's why this subject bothers people. Because subtraction is emotionally offensive. Addition feels like progress. New income, new house, new title, new kitchen, new car, new memberships, new rewards. Addition flatters the ego. Subtraction feels like loss, even when it's saving your future. Telling someone after 45 that wealth may depend less on earning more and more on removing recurring friction sounds almost insulting. It feels too simple, too unglamorous. But the math doesn't care what feels glamorous. If you free up $1,000 a month at 47 and keep that going until 67, the effect is enormous. That single change can grow into something in the range of $500,000, depending on returns. $500,000 is not a small lifestyle adjustment. It is an alternate old age. That's what numbers mean after 45. They stop being abstract. $1,000 a month is not just money. It might be the difference between retiring with choice and retiring with fear. It might be the difference between part-time work because you enjoy it and full-time work because stopping would be catastrophic. It might be the difference between helping your grandchildren with dignity and becoming financially dependent on your children at exactly the age when you wanted to stop being a burden. This is why some people appear to suddenly become wealthy in their 50s and early 60s. It wasn't sudden. It was delayed visibility. Compounding is strange that way. For years it looks unimpressive, almost disrespectful. Then it starts bending reality. The first $100,000 often feels brutally slow. The next few $100,000 can arrive much faster than people expect, not because the person became smarter, but because the money itself started working. That's another difference after 45. If you have assets, time begins to collaborate with you. If you don't, time becomes a bill collector. And here's where people fall behind in a way that's hard to admit. They confuse income with wealth and motion with progress. They are always doing something. Working harder. Taking on projects. Staying busy. Making decent money. Keeping up appearances. But busyness is not asset accumulation. Stress is not asset accumulation. A full calendar is not asset accumulation. Some people reach 55 with 30 years of labor behind them and almost nothing that can work without them. That is not just a financial issue. It's a structural issue. It means the machine only runs when they run. That creates a very specific kind of fear, even if they never say it out loud. Because at 28, being needed feels validating. At 52, being unable to stop can start to feel like a trap. And employers understand something workers often avoid. Aging changes bargaining power. Not always brutally. Not always fairly. But it changes. A 27-year-old employee can survive a bad career move and rebuild. A 53-year-old employee with high fixed costs, shallow savings, and no asset base may tolerate things that their younger self never would have tolerated. Not because they became weaker. Because the consequences became steeper. That's why wealth after 45 is not just about retirement. It is about reducing the number of humiliations you are financially forced to accept. That may be the most honest definition of money in midlife. Not luxury. Not status. Not some fantasy of yachts and perfect mornings. Just the ability to avoid becoming negotiable when you are tired. And once you see it that way, every recurring dollar becomes morally serious. The streaming services aren't the issue. The occasional dinner isn't the issue. The issue is the total architecture of drift. A life can become expensive by inches. People don't usually wreck themselves with one catastrophic decision. They do it with 20 reasonable ones. One financed vehicle. One larger home because we can afford it. One habit of using money to recover from stress. One pattern of rescuing others to preserve the self-image of being generous. One refusal to ask whether the lifestyle is actually worth the labor required to maintain it. That's how people fall behind after 45. Not loudly. Elegantly. They remain respectable. Functional. Socially presentable. But the invisible numbers are decaying. Savings are too light. Debt lives too long. Investments are underfunded. Spending is emotionally defended. And every year, the cost of changing direction rises. Meanwhile, the people building wealth are often doing things that look almost boring. They are not chasing every status signal. They are not constantly upgrading. They are not treating every raise as permission. They are not assuming future energy levels will bail out present-day excess. They are buying back freedom one recurring decision at a time. And that's the phrase most people need to hear. Buying back freedom. Because after 45, wealth is less about getting richer and more about becoming less owned. Less owned by debt. Less owned by image. Less owned by employers. Less owned by emergencies. Less owned by other people's expectations. That's what asset building actually does. It reduces the number of external forces that get to dictate your choices. A person with $700,000 invested may not feel rich in the cultural sense. But compared to someone with no savings, revolving debt, and high fixed costs, they live in a completely different psychological country. One person experiences bad news as a disruption. The other experiences it as a threat. And you can't separate the emotional from the numerical here. The numbers create the emotions. A person who knows they can go 12 months without income walks into conflict differently. A person whose lifestyle would collapse in 6 weeks walks into conflict differently. A person whose mortgage, cars, and obligations consume everything they earn hears every corporate rumor, every health symptom, every economic slowdown with amplified dread. So when we talk about some people building wealth and others falling behind after 45, we are not just talking about portfolios. We are talking about the nervous system. About whether money becomes a stabilizer or a source of continuous low-grade fear. About whether aging feels like deepening authority or rising exposure. And the cruel irony is that many people only start earning well right around the age when the consequences of waste become severe. They finally make enough to build real wealth, but they also finally make enough to construct an expensive identity. That's the fork in the road. One path says, I've worked hard. Now I'm going to display the rewards. The other path says, I've worked hard. Now I'm going to protect the next 20 years. Those are not the same decision wearing different clothes. They lead to radically different endings. Because if a 45-year-old directs an extra $2,000 a month into assets for 20 years, the result can move well past $1 million. If that same person spends the $2,000 maintaining a lifestyle that others can see, the future cost is not $2,000 a month. It is the lost million. That's the hidden price tag on performative success. People notice the visible purchase. They don't notice the invisible forfeiture. And invisible forfeiture is how adulthood gets expensive. That's also why comparison becomes so dangerous in this stage of life. Midlife comparison is mostly comparison of surfaces. You see the kitchen renovation, the luxury SUV, the resort photos, the private school, the polished home office. You do not see the account balances. You do not see the debt service. You do not see the panic at 3 a.m. You do not see the dependence on next quarter's bonus. You do not see the couple staying in a house they can technically afford and emotionally resent. You do not see the person who looks successful but cannot imagine stopping. And on the other side, you often don't see the wealth builder either. Because mature wealth is frequently quiet. It hides in paid-off obligations, simple habits, automatic investing, modest ego, and a deep indifference to impressing strangers. It doesn't always photograph well, but it ages beautifully. That may be the cleanest summary of the whole thing. Some lifestyles photograph well and age badly. Others look ordinary and age like power. After 45, you start choosing between them. Not once. Repeatedly. Every raise asks the question again. Every purchase asks the question again. Every obligation asks the question again. Every year you postpone the cleanup asks it more aggressively. Are you constructing freedom, or are you constructing a version of yourself that will become financially exhausting to maintain? Because eventually the bill arrives. Not all at once. That would almost be kinder. It arrives as limited choices. As needing to keep earning at a pace your body no longer enjoys. As watching opportunities pass because your fixed costs are too high. As carrying stress into years that were supposed to become lighter. As realizing that your biggest financial problem was never lack of intelligence. It was that you underestimated the long-term cost of recurring decisions. And the people who build wealth after 45? They usually understand something simple and brutal. The second half of life is less forgiving, but more powerful. Less forgiving because there's less room for denial. More powerful because disciplined action now still has enough time to matter enormously. That's the hope in all this. 45 is not late. 50 is not late. 55 is not automatically late. What is late is waiting for clarity while living in contradiction. What is late is continuing to fund a life that steals from your future just to preserve your present image. What is late is pretending that a decent income can protect you from bad structure forever. It can't. Sooner or later, arithmetic strips the story down to the frame. And when it does, the question is brutally clear. Did your money become a worker? Or did it remain a witness? Did the years produce assets? Or just receipts? Because that is the real split after 45. Not who worked harder. Not who looked successful. Not who seemed comfortable. Who turned time into ownership. And who turned time into overhead. One becomes increasingly free. The other becomes increasingly expensive to be.